everyone. Welcome to the Ncast, a podcast from Ncontracts. I'm Guy Weissmantel with Ncontracts, and this episode has me super intrigued. AI, or artificial intelligence, may have started out in TV or the movies and sounded completely futuristic, whether it was the Jetsons or James Bond or Tom Cruise in Minority Report. But it's a part of our lives today, as I think we'd all admit. It's everywhere. And for financial institutions, it can be as simple or as complex as they wish to use it. But being informed and making the right decisions when it comes to AI, that's a little bit more difficult, especially if you don't have the right data, the means to analyze it, or how to even use it. So in today's podcast, Dr. Gary Shiffman. Gary's an adjunct professor at the Center for Security Studies at Georgetown. He's also the founder and the CEO of Giant Oak. He's going to be with us to demystify AI and talk about how AI is increasingly being used across financial institutions, as well as how you can work with your senior management and help them understand the benefits of AI as it relates to how you do your strategic planning in your bank, how you look for new customers, how you look for new business opportunities. There's a lot to unpack here, so we'd better get to it.
Hi, I'm Paul Vinecourt, and welcome to today's recording of the Ncast, Risk and Artificial Intelligence. Today I have with me Dr. Gary Shiffman, Adjunct Professor in the Center of Security Studies at Georgetown, published author and founder and CEO of Giant Oak Incorporated. Gary, so glad to talk to you today. Welcome to the program.
Paul, it's great to be with you. Thanks very much.
Well, before we dive right into AI, I think it's important that we kind of take a step back and set the stage about talking about data. I think this is an important starting point because AI is really relying on data to be effective. You know, in today's day and age, I could very easily and quickly search for anything I want in a nanosecond on my phone, which really comes in handy when you have a 5-year-old that's full of questions, right? However, you know, in our previous discussions, you've made the point that we're actually saturated with data, which makes finding the right data to power our decisions pretty difficult. And I know you've developed an algorithm to assist financial institutions better conduct due diligence and avoid this information overload. I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about the methodology behind that algorithm and how institutions can use and benefit from it.
Yeah, great lead in, Paul. You know, the data has this wonderful promise. Like, data is supposed to be the magical elixir that solves all of our problems. It's going to end crime as we know it. It's going to feed the world, cure cancer, and yet, when we go to work every day, we don't feel the love. We don't feel like data is actually on our side, and data is not really our friend. And that's because of the human capacity to process data is limited. So what we've seen in the last decade is this massive explosion of data. Others have stated that the data, 90% of the data in the world is less than 2 years old, or the amount of data in the world doubles every 24 months. And in that world, we as humans cannot process all of the data. So the frustration is that the data are there, the answers to our questions are there, but we can't process it. And so it's frustrating. It's supposed to be helpful, but it's just not there yet.
That's interesting when you talk about the age of data, because I think, you know, traditionally we look at data as numbers, right? And now we've got data that's streaming video and audio and all these other data points that didn't exist before. So I can see how that would compound and grow rather quickly.
Right, exactly. So if you think about the way we used to think of data, that's a really great comment. We used to think of data as an Excel spreadsheet, right? That's how we grew up thinking of data. Data is rows and columns. And in the technical vernacular, we call that structured data. But now we live in a world with unstructured data. So that's the internet and web pages and documents and PDFs and images and videos, and that's unstructured data. So not only do we have this massive proliferation of structured data, but we also have this explosion of unstructured data. So you've got the problem of the volume of data, you've got the velocity of data, and then you've got the variability of data, which is that the data comes in so many forms and formats. And this further compounds the challenge. Now, I know you want to talk about the solution, but I feel like we're just piling on here on the challenge. So tell me, where you want to go next.
Well, that's okay. Again, I wanted to kind of start this conversation with data because that's going to really be the foundation for the other things we talk about. One of the things I like as a consumer when we talk about AI is that it's continually learning, right? So we talk about that feedback loop, right? The thumbs up button on my Pandora and on my Netflix and on all those other things where I tell it what it likes and it learns. It's really an important component of AI. So I was kind of wondering can you extrapolate that to your interface and tell me about how your users are helping your algorithm learn over time.
Got it. Yeah. So you're jumping way ahead, and that's great. I'm gonna talk about that. So what in Ghost, which is the product that Giant Oak brings to market, it's an adverse media tool, and what it does is we have re-indexed the internet. So the internet is massive and it's growing every moment of every day, and it's mostly unstructured with a lot of structured data. And you want to onboard customers, or you want to do customer risk refresh or different things like that. So you want to screen, and it would be great if you could like run a Google search on everybody, but you can't do it. This is this idea that the data are valuable and that they're there and they're freely available, but it's just too hard to get at it. So Ghost reorganizes the internet, re-indexes the internet. Google, Bing, general purpose search tools have about 5% of the internet. And they have the 5% that's most popular because they sell online ads for a living. If you're looking for risk, if you're looking for money laundering and fraud, you might not find what you need in the Google index. So Ghost is a reindex of the internet for finding threats. The queries get run through Ghost, the results get shown to humans, and then the humans, just like on the apps that you like so much, Paul, they do thumbs up, thumbs down. And when the human does thumbs up, thumbs down, they're creating the dossier that they need, but they're also training the algorithm. And so it's a constantly evolving and learning process. And that's artificial intelligence. So there's some building block terms that I know you wanted me to get to. And the last is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is when the technology shows the human something and gets feedback. So it reveals something to the outside world and gets a reaction and reacts to the outside world, right? So this give and take is what really AI is. It's the agent that does that. And that's what Ghost is. Ghost is a machine learning platform with an AI component, so it can get those thumbs ups, thumbs downs from humans. Everything else you do, your Facebook page, your LinkedIn page, Google, when you're shopping for presents, this holiday season, is all AI in the sense that everything you do, everything you click on is going to be training algorithms. And that's just the nature of the world we live in today.
Awesome. Yeah. And I did jump a little bit ahead, but I think it's kind of good to put up front. We talk about AI and then you can't really have an intelligent conversation about what that is because people just assume they know and they really don't.
Right.
One of the things you did mention that I wanted to unpack a little bit was, obviously, that 5% of the internet is monetized and it's what we currently search on. That being said, my assumption is that, you're looking at the other 95% that is deep web or dark web. Is that true?
Yeah. So we're looking at what I call the deep web. The deep web is free and publicly available, just like the open web. The open web is what Google indexes. The deep web is the other 95% that is equally available, except Google doesn't make it easy for you to get at because it's not popular. And then the dark web is less than 1%. And the dark web is an adversarial environment. That's where people are intentionally trying to be not discovered and trying to hide. So open, deep, dark web. Open web 5%, deep web 95%. And yes, you did the math. That doesn't leave very much left, but the dark web is tiny, tiny, tiny. And that's where you'll find a lot of like illicit markets and stuff like that.
Right. Okay. So getting back into Ghost a little bit, I know you've got a behavioral model there that's underpinned with economic theory, right? So you're basically asserting that, certain illicit behavior is born out of necessity due to scarce resources. Makes total sense to me.
Well said.
And obviously, your publications are toward that end as well. But I'm wondering, you use this methodology to kind of look at consumer risk, due diligence, and those types of things. But could we apply the same theoretical underpinning to corporate actions, such as risk-taking behavior and or risk avoidance?
Yes, absolutely. So if you go back to behavioral science, which is in my foundation, what I am, I'm a behavioral scientist who's interested in illicit activities, and that's my vocation, that's my calling, and that's what I do. So we can build models of human behavior, and we're okay at it, right? Humans are very predictable. They might be less predictable than molecules or atoms or cells, right? So if you're a chemist or a biologist, it's largely a more predictable world than as a behavioral scientist like I am. But you can build models and you can get highly accurate on your predictive ability of human behavior. You get more variance in those models the more you aggregate to groups of people. So to the extent that a corporation is a group of people acting as a collective, your models might be less precise than if you're building a model of Paul and a model of Gary. You can be extremely precise. So that's a long way of saying, yes, we do build models of corporations, of licit corporations, as well as illicit corporations. So if I'm interested in the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, I can build models of how they're going to launder money. Just keep in mind that in this world of modeling, you have to be able to do measurement. And if you do measurement well, you're going to see the fidelity or the accuracy of the models will dissipate as you encompass larger and larger groups of people. So it's always people, though. Like, companies are not people. Like, under law, I guess they're a person, but in reality, companies are run by people. And so you have to think about the people running the company.
Right. So the bigger your data set, the more complicated the human aspect of it is, the more potential you have for confounds in your model. That makes great sense. So let's, knowing that, go ahead.
So I just want to be clear. If you have a whole lot of data on one person, more data helps you with your model. If you have a certain amount of data, but it's encompassing hundreds or thousands of people, then your model becomes less accurate.
Cool. So given that, the basis of that, let's kind of walk this back a little bit and talk about, maybe having AI help us in a smaller space of a lesser population. So, when I think about COVID, I think about the ways that consumer patterns have changed almost overnight. So can we leverage AI to help us detect when consumer patterns change?
Absolutely. And we're already doing it at our company. And I think the US government needs to get on board and get moving with this. We're in the era that I call the era of the amateur. So 2020 is the year when lots of people entered fraud that were not previously engaged in fraud because of the COVID relief packages and the billions of dollars coming out of the US government and governments around the world. And this imperative to move money quickly into the economy has really enticed a lot of people to try fraud that previously were not fraudsters. So we're in this world of amateurs, and even sophisticated criminals are having an easier time hiring money mules, people with legitimate bank accounts, to move money for them, probably unwittingly. So we've got the amateur criminals and we've got the unwitting criminals. And I've seen studies where we're catching this year over 300% more than we have in previous years. And that's just what we're catching. So the numbers are absolutely through the roof, Paul. Absolutely through the roof on people who are changing their behavior, engaging in illicit activities because of all of the money coming out of these coronavirus relief programs.
Well, and also I think it really speaks to your model that, these things are occurring out of necessity, right? And so it's not just the availability of the money, it's the availability of the money coupled with the fact that we've had, tons of people lose their jobs and really, didn't have recourse and, had to do something because of necessity. So very interesting. And also, again, it tracks right back to your model. So, but I like, and we understand that, Ghost is more on that illicit side of things, but for our operations folks, for our C-suite, people that are making strategic decisions, I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts about how we can use AI to kind of, better create products and services to better address our client needs, right? How do we take AI and use it as a profit center? And if so, if we can do that, is it feasible? I mean, we know AI is expensive, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, great question. So let me start with the field that's closest to home for me, which is if we use machine learning, if we use machine learning for screening for risk, screening for threats, for onboarding our customers, and we get exquisite measurement of risk, we can expand the top line of our organizations because we can provide services to more people. Yeah. So the flip side of exquisite measurement of risk is financial inclusion. And financial inclusion is such an important topic, and we need to do a much better job of it. If you do read my book, one of the points that I really emphasize over and over again is this idea of we shouldn't be labeling people. We shouldn't say, well, they're from this country, or they're this ethnicity, or they're this religion. But when it comes to national security policy, we do that all of the time. Labels it goes back to this idea when you try to make a broad statement, or a specific statement about a broad group of people, you're almost always wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So right now, what we do is in financial services, we have industries or geographies or other categories that we exclude. We might have a policy in our financial institution where we're not going to provide banking services to charities, to casinos, to cannabis dispensaries, to these different categories of businesses, because we don't know which casino is risky, which is not. We don't know which charity is risky and which is not. So we write off the entire population. If we could really measure risk, we might know which small percentage of charities are actually risky and which large percentage of charities are actually not. And we could actually provide banking products and services to charities. But because we are so bad at measuring risk, we exclude populations from our banking products. So you could increase the top line of the bank, probably increase the bottom line of the bank, make the world a better place by providing banking services, financial inclusion, and minimizing risk to your enterprise.
See, that's a really interesting take on it, because I think it's counterintuitive to the way a lot of our executive leadership thinks. We want to increase the bottom line by having more profitable relationships with the customers that we have. We don't think about increasing the top line because we can have better risk analysis and let more folks through the door. That being said, financial inclusivity is a big thing in the regulatory community. So it's interesting to kind of dovetail that, we can use AI to get more people in the door, and it's better for our nation, it's better for our consumers, and it's in line with the regulatory goals that we have to include.
And you will increase your bottom line also. It's not either or.
Right. And that's the great thing. We're increasing the bottom line by increasing the top line.
Let's say that you've got some underserved populations, and your compliance program costs you $100 a year per person. And on this population, you're going to make $10 a year per person in revenue. It's like, you just don't want to go out and market to that population. If we get good and efficient, if we get effective and efficient with measuring risk, we can now provide and eagerly provide financial products and services to those populations. And that's where we need to be going.
Yeah, I think that is a paradigm shifting way of looking at things, and also in how we're going to leverage AI. But, a little bit of a counterbalance to that, it's good to hear that we can do this. And this paradigm shift is really kind of mind blowing to me. And I think to a lot of other folks in senior leadership that are going to watch the podcast. But, the counterbalance to that is that the financial field is characteristically risk averse, right? And so institutions might not want to assume, an unknown regulatory risk for an AI implementation if it hasn't really been, kind of vetted and addressed by their regulators. So I think, one of the questions that we had is, do you have any concept of what the regulatory environment thinks of AI? Has there been any guidance? And if so, where should we go? Where can we direct our senior leadership to go and read what the regulators are thinking about AI?
Yeah. So first of all, December 2018, there was the joint statement on innovation. So financial institutions were encouraged, is the way I read it, encouraged to, if they wanted to experiment, to please do so with innovation. Personally, I spend a lot of time talking with government officials on, not on Ghost, not on any particular product, but on AI and machine learning. It's kind of these big ideas that you and I are talking about. Everybody knows the world is changing on us. Everybody knows it because we walk around with these smartphones and we see how machine learning and AI is impacting every aspect of our life. And if you think it's not going to impact AML, BSA, CFT, you're fooling yourself. Of course it is. So I think senior leadership at banks, senior leadership in government agencies, regulators, examiners, they all go home and they have their smartphones and their smart devices and they know it's here. So what do you do? Goes back to the point I raised earlier, is measurement. This is not magic, right? It's just science and collaboration. That's all it is.
Yep.
Collaborate, find a good team, find people you trust, collaborate with them, and measure your results. And if you measure your results, you can be a risk-averse senior banker, you can be a risk-averse bank examiner. I don't care. If you measure your results, you've got what you need to decide whether you should move forward or not.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. But I think, in the space, again, I think bankers are more comfortable. They don't want to be the first one out, right? They want to feel a little bit of relative safety in their methods and how they're doing things. So, I know we had a statement regarding innovation with BSA AML, which again, I think was very helpful to someone in your position, but I would like to see, a more inclusive statement of, innovation across the spectrum of product service offerings of how you're measuring that data that we collect, as you said, and, hopefully eventually we'll get something like that. The other thing that I thought about, is we've got institutions of various sizes, from a couple of $100 million or under $100 million rather, to well into the tens and 20s and 50s of billions. So, I think of right sizing when I think of AI, right? There's a cost to it and there's a knowledge base involved. So I think the question I have for you is AI appropriate for everyone, right? Is it more appropriate for institutions that are above a certain asset size? And if so, what type of institutions do you see that are currently leveraging AI?
That's a great question. Thank you, Paul, for asking that. Machine learning is the great equalizer. It's math, right? We're not building satellites. We're not putting big mainframes in anybody's building. It's math. It's an algorithm. It's small. It's lightweight, and the ability to move it and share it and collaborate is almost zero. So small banks, tiny banks, large banks, everybody can be benefiting from this move to AI and machine learning. This is the moment at which small banks, medium-sized banks, and large banks can be on equal footing, because there is no reason for price discrimination that would eliminate smaller players in the market. This is like such a cool moment in history.
See, that's interesting because, as it usually goes, the larger banks are the leaders. They spend the big bucks. And then once those solutions are vetted, they become cheaper and then become available to the medium and small folks. So it's interesting to hear that we can, as an industry, kind of be on equal footing here in the implementation of a new technology.
Right. I'm not here to talk about my own company or product, but everything I build is built upon this idea that because it's math and formula and equations, it scales very nicely. If you're a small bank and you're going to pay $1,000 a year, and if you're a large bank and you're going to pay, $1.5 million a year, it's all based upon usage and value derived, but the marginal cost is really based upon the usage. So small banks are going to use the technology less, and so they're going to pay less, and it scales beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the scalability is definitely there. Yeah. Well, we only have a short time left, and I wanted to switch gears a little bit. We've been talking about AI and ops, and then AI and money laundering, but I want to talk about AI and risk management. Right, it's a profession that's really near and dear to me, but also risk management is somewhat in its infancy. As our risk landscape changes, especially due to COVID, and institutions realize the benefits of aligning risk with strategy, the importance of risk management as a discipline is becoming more top of mind for board and C-suite. And so I'm kind of wondering, how can we help use AI to help us mature the profession of risk management? And how do we get risk managers aware of AI and get them comfortable with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I spend a lot of time when I'm out talking with banks with the chief risk officers. And chief risk officers have, as you say, that they have a much bigger portfolio of risk. They're thinking about systemic risk for the institution, what could cause the institution to fail. AML, fraud risk is a portion of it, but there's so much more to risk. And the risk community tends to be more mathy, right? So they're used to building models and running numbers. So it's interesting in the AML CFT world. I want people to be more mathy. I want people to do more measurement of outcomes, which we have failed as a community to do in the past largely. And I want us to measure outcomes. As at the more strategic chief risk officer level, we know how to do math. I think we need to learn how to adopt machine learning methodologies into our traditional methodologies. So traditional methodologies, sure, they were mathy, but they were, linear regression models and variations on that. And I don't know if we just lost half of your audience by using those words. I'm so sorry.
I had to smile at linear regression. Sorry.
Right? But that's been the bread and butter of kind of the enterprise risk community for years. Machine learning allows you to learn about parameters to measure that you didn't know about before. So here's how the paradigm changes. In the world of, like, if 2021 is the dividing point, so pre-2021, you get risk experts, and they tell you, well, if you want to measure risk, these are the 5 traits or attributes you have to measure, and then we build models and we look for changes, outside of parameters over time. 2021 going forward in the machine learning world, you actually take training data, and that's an important word to remember, training data. You take training data on actual known instances you want to try to avoid, and you train models based upon that ground truth. And that those models are going to suggest, in addition to the 5 things that veteran of the industry knew about, here's 15 other things that are also correlated with that risk. So now you've got a model of 20 attributes, not 5 attributes. Right. And this can change over time because the world changes. So you've got this idea of more attributes, and you've got this idea of dynamic modeling over time because, global pandemics happen and all of your models get thrown out and you have to relearn. Well, machine learning allows you to do that. So we need to adapt to dynamic learning systems where we look across more data and more attributes.
And again, I think that's interesting because, as we talked about before, on the strategic side of things, that's counterintuitive, right? Us as risk managers, we want to dial into and tap into those things in our model that are going to most move the needle. Whereas when we can leverage AI, we're actually expanding as opposed to contracting.
That's right.
We're including additional factors that we didn't even know about.
And that gets back to where you started this conversation, which is we've got the promise of more data and the frustration of too much data. Mm-hmm. If you understand how to organize that data, use your training data, and train models on your training data, you're going to be able to go from 5 to 20 attributes that matter and look across more data across more time. And you're going to see things you didn't see before. And the idea is you're using the machine to find the pattern. And that's really what machine learning is.
Oh, and as you said, Dr. Shiffman, I think we've come full circle, and that's great because we are out of time for this episode of the Ncast. I really appreciate your time today. I know I've learned a ton, and I hope our viewers will too. So thank you very much.
Paul, thanks. I appreciate the chance to talk with you. Thanks very much.
Okay, everyone, that wraps up what I think is another great episode of the Ncast. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review and let us know. And if you're not yet subscribed, you can do so on your favorite podcasting platform. And if you're looking for more information on how to harness AI for your financial institution, head over to the Ncontracts blog, where we have some great articles that start to dig into the subject for y'all. It's on ncontracts.com/blog. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you all next week.